After 9/11, the day of September 11th, Rumsfeld pushed for an invasion of Iraq. To refresh your memory, Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, zero, zip, nada. He immediately walked up to CIA Director George Tenet and said, find anything you got that links these attacks to Iraq. Just find anything. I don't know if you remember a guy named Clark. He was a chief counterterrorism advisor on the National Security Council. He served under Clinton and then under President George W. Bush. He was a holdover from the Clinton administration. When Rumsfeld took over the Defense Department, Richard Clark, I believe his first name was Richard Clark, he said to Rumsfeld, trust me on this, your biggest concern is Osama bin Laden. And of course, Rumsfeld ignored Richard Clark. And Clark wrote a book about this. And in his book, he wrote that on 9/11, in the very first emergency meeting, on the day of these attacks, Rumsfeld said in the Situation Room, why shouldn't we go into Iraq? Not just Al-Qaeda, let's go get Iraq. And Clark wrote that Rumsfeld kept saying, we need to, it's not funny, I'm sorry. We need to bomb Iraq, we need to bomb Iraq. And Richard Clark said, no, Iraq had nothing to do with this. Al-Qaeda is in Afghanistan and parts of Pakistan. Leave Iraq out of this. And Rumsfeld on 9/11 said to Richard Clark, but I know that Iraq had nothing to do with this, but there aren't any good targets in Afghanistan, quote, and there are plenty of good targets in Iraq. Donald Rumsfeld. Before and during the Iraq War, Donald Rumsfeld claimed that Iraq had active weapons of mass destruction. He insisted in the lead up to the war in Iraq, into the illegal invasion of Iraq, that Iraq had WMDs. He gave a famous press conference on February 12th, 2002, about a month before the invasion, and he said, there's no doubt that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. On March 30th, 2003, when the war was just getting going, Donald Rumsfeld went on ABC's This Week, and he said to George Stephanopoulos, we know where the weapons of mass destruction are. And then he got specific. He said they are in Tikrit and Baghdad, east of Tikrit, west of Baghdad. And they never found weapons of mass destruction. He led us into a war that cost trillions of dollars, thousands of American lives, maybe 1 million lives in Iraq when you add up the health consequences of the invasion, of the water being turned off, the electricity being turned off. Lancet says it could be as close to 1 million Iraqis died from the invasion, not to mention 2-3 million Iraqis who lost their homes, who became refugees because of this. Donald Rumsfeld, who, by the way, would robo-sign his condolence letters to the parents and the wives and the husbands of the soldiers who died in Afghanistan. He didn't even have the decency. He signed about 1,000 condolence letters using a machine instead of a pen. He ignored all the warnings in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq. He ignored, as I said earlier, Richard Clark's warning that his biggest problem would be Osama bin Laden. Instead, Rumsfeld, as defense secretary, doing this for a second time, was going to bring in his expertise and streamline and privatize our military. That was his goal. He wasn't interested in defending us. He was the Secretary of Defense, and he did not defend us on 9/11. He was trying to streamline the Pentagon and make it lean and mean. Not lean and mean when it comes to the military-industrial complex, just lean and mean in terms of the soldiers. And he guaranteed the idiot George W. Bush that we can go in to Iraq and fight this war on the cheap. He said, we don't need as many troops to go into Baghdad the way your father did in 1991. We can do this smart. We can do this smart. That's what Rumsfeld told the moron, President George W. Bush. And after the invasion, it soon became evident that Donald Rumsfeld, who served twice as defense secretary, never came up with an exit strategy. He never had a plan for what happens after Saddam Hussein disappears. He had no plan on how to occupy Iraq so it wouldn't descend into a civil war. He had no plan. He actually thought that once we went in there, the Iraqi people would just rise up and a democracy would flourish without the assistance of the United States. That democracy is just a part of nature, and it would just rise because people would be so happy to get rid of Saddam Hussein. And so he had no plan. He figured we'd go in there, topple Saddam Hussein, and leave, and there'd be freedom in Iraq. And our soldiers had to stay totally unprepared to deal with improvised explosive devices, which would blow up their tanks, our American soldiers' tanks. They had Humvees that were blowing up. The insurgents would plant these IEDs on the road. Our Humvees would ride over them, and there wasn't enough undergirding to protect our soldiers because Donald Rumsfeld never thought of improvised explosive devices. So our soldiers were getting killed, coming home missing limbs. It took years for our soldiers in Iraq to get Humvees that could protect them from IEDs. He was asked about this. I'll play this if I can. I'm going to try to play clips today as I learn. I don't know if I can do this, but this should be remembered. In 2004, I think this was around Christmas. I don't know if I'm going to be able to play it, but in 2004, Donald Rumsfeld visited Kuwait, where our soldiers were stationed. That was where they stayed before they went north into Iraq. And he had a town hall with our soldiers. And it had become apparent by 2004. We went into Iraq in 2003. They had prepared for this war since 2001. And our soldiers, 3 years in, still didn't have body armor. They didn't have, it was incredible what they were lacking. This is a town hall meeting that the defense secretary had with soldiers who were about to go back into Iraq. They had some time off and they were now going back in. Listen to the reaction from the soldiers after this National Guardsman from Tennessee asks Donald Rumsfeld this question.
So we've had troops in Iraq for coming on 3 years, and we've always stayed here out of Kuwait. Now, why do we soldiers have to dig through local landfills for pieces of scrap metal and compromised ballistic glass to up-armor our vehicles, and why don't we have those resources readily available to us? I missed the first part of your question, and could you repeat it for me? Yes, Mr. Secretary. Our soldiers have been fighting in Iraq for coming up on 3 years. A lot of us are getting ready to move north relatively soon. Our vehicles are not armored. We're digging pieces of rusted scrap metal and compromised ballistic glass that's already been shot up, dropped, busted, picking the best out of this scrap to put on our vehicles to take into combat. We do not have proper armament vehicles to carry with us north.
I talked to the general coming out here about the pace at which the vehicles are being armored. They have been brought from all over the world, wherever they're not needed, to a place here where they are needed. I'm told that they're being, the Army is, I think it's something like 400 a month are being done. And it's essentially a matter of physics. It isn't a matter of money. It isn't a matter on the part of the Army of desire. It's a matter of production and capability of doing it. As you know, you go to war with the Army you have, not the Army you might want or wish to have at a later time. Since the Iraq conflict began, the Army has been pressing ahead to produce the armor necessary at a rate that they believe, it's a greatly expanded rate from what existed previously, but a rate that they believe is the rate that is all that can be accomplished at this moment.
You go to war with the army you have, not the army you wish you had. Army to me means soldiers, not weapons. He conflated machines and weapons with the soldiers who died because he went to war without a plan.